Thank you.
There you go. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time.
Hi guys, welcome to only the second ever in-studio episode, a podcast with Nandan Kamath, who is a very seasoned veteran. I hope you're okay with the word veteran sports lawyer, one of the trailblazers in the field. And we have him with us to discuss a very special, a deeply moving and very inspiring, thoughtful book, and his latest book called Boundary Lab. Welcome Nandan Kamath to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Gopal. Great to be here.
Okay, Nandan, let's just dive right into this. What led you to write a book on sports, which is not on sports, because it starts from sports, but then it builds into and integrates so many other themes and facets. So just take us through this Boundary Lab. Has it been a gestating baby in your mind for many years now?
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, Gopal, this is a book that has been my life in the making in some sense.
Okay.
As a young person, all I could think of was sport, either playing it, watching it. And in general, I'm a very curious person, curious about the world, curious about the way it works and systems. But while I had that curiosity, I'm really sort of unidimensional in the sense that everything for me, I view through the lens of sport. So you look at a situation, let's say I have to manage a selection process, I'll think of it in the way if I was to design a sports competition. If I were to make a decision, I think of it, how would a sports person think about this? So in that sense, it was a lens that I've lived a large part of my life with. And in some sense, the book was coming together of my curiosity, but also my professional experiences, my knowledge. I've studied law, and that has led to me becoming a lawyer because I studied law, but also the experiences I've had over the last couple of decades in Indian sport. And I've held many hats. So when I was young, I used to be a cricketer, played at the junior level, state and national level, but then went off to law school, stopped cricket, went back to cricket a little bit when I was in university abroad, but also just saw the way sport has been managed in other countries, experienced that, and just saw the gaps in India. So when I came back in 2006, started engaging with Indian sport development, set up and co-founded Go Sports Foundation, which has worked with many of the Olympic and Paralympic athletes. Started my own law practice, which has now grown to a reasonable size, working and engaging with sports law. So it was all of these various elements combined with that curiosity coming together in a bunch of ideas. And it just felt, it was actually before COVID that I started working on it. It felt like the time was right, these ideas coming together. And it was just more an act of expression and a bringing together of ideas which had been germinating for a while.
Okay, and obviously I read your book. I loved it, and I carried it with me wherever I took for all my sports events. It's a very meditative book. Like you would think that it's going to be one of those non-fiction, yes, but still a sort of page turner in the sense that you can move on from one page to the next, and it's not really engaging your mind. But the level of thought that has gone into it and the experience comes through, right? There are many academics who perhaps may do a thesis on Indian sport and it'll sound a certain way, right? But it's quite obvious that a lot of the experiences in this book stem from your own interactions with different stakeholders. So can you just help us understand in 2006, right, when you came back, what was the sports landscape like in India? Because for those of us from the current Gen Z or the newer generations, sports is everywhere, right? But at that time, it would have, when you're coming back, from the US, I believe at that time, what was it like? Because it's not easy, right? Even now it maybe you have lawyers who are taking up sports law as a niche, or you have lawyers who become entrepreneurs. But back then, it would have been quite a wild decision for you to do this. If you can just help us understand what was the landscape like back in 2006 when you're coming back to India, because there's no one else who has done this or had this kind of career trajectory you had.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like it was barren territory. There were people already engaging. Obviously, the BCCI has been in operation for a while. So there's been aspects of work that have come, but it wasn't in any way systematic for that matter. I mean, I came back, wanted to work in sports law, but I took some time to begin working in the legal field, simply because there wasn't an established way to set up a sports law practice in that sense. I mean, I spoke to a bunch of people I'd played cricket with. I spoke to people working in pretty senior positions in the government, in running their own academies. And all of them asked, so who do you use for legal work? They said, we actually don't even use a lawyer. So it was a very nascent and early stage at that point. when you talk about the broader ecosystem and the environment, there was a huge amount of cynicism about Indian sport. The thing I heard the most at that time was that actually we don't have any sports talent. And that you're actually wasting your time doing what you're doing. It sounds almost absurd at this point, and that's the journey. It characterizes the journey from moving from absurdity to reality of that time, where there was a huge amount of negativity. I mean, you had the Olympics, we'd come back. 2000, we won one medal. 2004, I mean, we had many Olympics where it was pretty stark. But two things actually, for me, changed the trajectory of both my legal work as well as the outlook and attitude to sport. And both happened in 2008. So one was Abhinav Bindra's gold medal.
Right.
And the second was the birth of the IPL. And IPL became the first real systematic foray, which is well documented. So where players started getting formalized agreements, and they were sort of standardized agreements across the board. You had franchise agreements. Suddenly people felt the need to document their sponsorship agreements. Okay. So very quickly in that period, end of 2007, once the IPL was announced to the launch of the IPL, suddenly lots of stuff started happening. We had a bunch of UK lawyers come in and help set up the league. Okay. But the minute that happened, the team started needing help. Players started asking questions. So suddenly the sports lawyer, in some sense, the sports lawyer in waiting entered the waiting room, and then the door opened. So that was quite stark in the shift that happened from a completely non-documented, informal sector. It went to, at least in the cricket world, a much more systematized, documented sort of system. And Abhinav's medal actually changed a lot, not just for shooting, but for the belief that what was possible and was it worth investing in sport. So that if it was a silver medal, I think it would have been different. The fact that it was the gold, the monkey was off the back saying that Indians aren't good at sport. It was a very difficult sport that he actually won a medal in. Went through huge amount of effort to get there. So I think that reinforced, at least in my mind, and my guess is in other people's minds as well, that if you put in the effort, the talent is actually there. And my belief has always been that talent is hugely resident in India. It's hiding in actually plain view. It's just that we haven't systematically approached the development of that talent, establishing pathways. Because at the end of the day, what are systems? Systems, the job of systems in sport is that if the talent is there, to allow opportunity for that talent, and for exceptional talent, at the end of the day, to make success inevitable. So are you putting barriers in the way, or is your job to remove barriers? And a system will remove barriers, create pathways, and establish in some sense a ladder where if you're ready to climb the next rung, the rung is there and not broken.
Okay. Now coming again, now in 2006, right? Obviously whatever you're saying now is from your experience of the last 20 years. But in 2006, you probably were not aware of these potential barriers, right? In 2006, you just thought, okay, Indian sports, there is a potential, it has to get better. So Law NK, did it start off purely as a sports law firm, or were you also engaged in commercial agreements, contracts, or has it always been a sports law firm from day one?
Yeah, so I think the beauty of being young is also naivety. If actually at that stage you knew all of the things you had to overcome, you probably wouldn't start. But that's what being young and is about. And actually Law NK was the only reason it's named Law NK was that's the domain name I went and registered.
Okay.
I happened to be at a time and place available in Bangalore, having set up Go Sports Foundation, but struggling to get it to survive, get it to fund itself. But then I started getting questions, like I said, around the IPL, people from the cricket world, from the sports world, starting to ask me questions. Now, did I want to set up a law firm? Yes, working in sports law. Was it a conscious effort to set it up? The answer is no. Okay. It's something that happened to me. So I was a lawyer already working a little bit in sport in a country that suddenly needed that type of skill. So while the intent and desire was there, I had not taken formal steps. So in some sense, the clients made me a sports lawyer at that point of time, because I'd actually had a extensive amount of sporting experience. And I think it's reasonably rare, and still remains reasonably rare, for someone to have played a reasonable level of sport and then to have pursued a legal education, because in general, sport and education haven't gone together particularly well. And certainly sport and a professional education where the person comes out equipped with reasonably specialized skills, which you could call the legal profession, is rare. So there was already a level of trust, because when you play in teams together, people trust you.
Right.
But then that trust and the presumption that I had some knowledge to offer. So a lot of little sort of assignments came in of help me with one sponsorship agreement. Someone's trying to sign me up here and there. So it started in very small ways. We ended up, at that point, I'd already done a lot of commercial contracting, mergers and acquisitions. So I'd worked in the US. So it's not that I did not take on any work. Whatever work came in, you did. But I had a very clear vision of the types of work I wanted to do, and the ability to reject work that I didn't want to do in some sense, because I was also working on other projects at the same time around Go Sports, around other initiatives.
Okay, no, this is, I didn't expect this. I assumed the sequence would be Law NK first and then Go Sports or Go Sports Foundation. But you are saying when you came to India in 2006, Go Sports was how you began.
Yes.
But now, okay, but Go Sports is a non-profit, right? How were you so confident, or maybe you were not confident, but you just had to take the plunge, that you're going to get investment and funding for athletes to take part in the Olympics and hopefully medal? Because this is way before the government TOPS, Target Olympic Podium Scheme, right? This is private investment. So who did you meet first? How did you convince them that, hey, you know what, that Nandan is someone you can trust on, that this money is going to be properly accounted for, it's going to be used for the development of sports? How did you identify these sports, and how was that entire process like?
Early on, it was very much sort of jump in head first and then learn how to swim. It was early stages. There were a few talent management companies, I think mostly inspired by Jerry Maguire at that point of time. Perhaps not a well-established systematic industry, but there were early stages of stuff that was happening. There were some players doing well across different sports. There was endorsements outside of cricket for the first time. I think Sania Mirza was doing particularly well at that point. It was early stages. You saw some hope. How we went about doing it, it was a couple of classmates from school who actually helped me set it up together.
Okay.
It's not like we had some great clarity of business plan, but our purpose was actually to engage with the system and have a level of confidence that we will figure out a way. So actually, Go Sports originally was set up as a for-profit company.
Okay.
And the intent was to actually grow it as a commercial enterprise, manage athletes, manage their legal work, manage their endorsements. But you realize that, you can be ahead of the game, but you can also be the wrong people at the right time. And I don't think the industry was ready for the types of people we were and our intent. What happened is, over the first 2-3 years, we had some reasonable success with athletes. We chose non-traditional sport. We chose as the sports like swimming. But we had great talent, but obviously the commercial opportunities didn't really flow in. But we pivoted at the right time. So by 2008, we actually also set up a non-profit. So it was both for-profit and non-profit for a while, till we decided that non-profit was the way to go. So we saw some traction. We started off a sort of selection processes for programs that were scholarships. Raised a little bit of funding from friends, family, small amounts. But at the same time, at that point, the Law NK had also started. So I sort of funded some of these activities from legal fees. So it was very useful at the time to be able to earn fees in a profession that was well established in that sense. But also what happened is, that attitude of running a law firm, and I think you've been part of it early on as an intern as well. The practices were spread across the same office and same rooms. So a lot of the sort of formality of documentation, reporting, and all of those things were built very early on. which the average non-profit is not going to have. So in some sense, it was a extension of a law firm, not for profit. Many of the lawyers also early on actually volunteered a lot, helped with lots of the events, helped with a lot of the documentation. So Go Sports Foundation has always been very strong on its contracts and its reporting. So in many ways, it had its genesis in a law firm. So in that sense, we've been very ahead of the game on compliance, legal. And you realize that in the long run, actually the first thing people want is someone you can trust. Results in some sense come secondarily, especially if there's donor money, CSR money. The first principle is do no harm before you do good. And I think we've kept an excellent track record. I mean, hats off to the team on multiple fronts of keeping donor goodwill, reputation strong. And that comes from repeated good practices. And I think that's one of the things I'm as proud of as the results of athletes and sort of the dedicated hard work of the team.
Okay, awesome. So just to get this right, for the benefit of young lawyers who may be watching this, you were able to fund Go Sports through Law & K, right? Is that how you primarily, that's how you earned your revenue from 2006 to...
For a while. I mean, it's we all put a little bit of money in, but then after that, sort of the operating expenses, I was sort of, I wouldn't say moonlighting as a lawyer, but certainly practicing as a lawyer. And you realize that a profession that is recognized and understood to be fee earning, even a startup, you can start making a decent amount of money if you're adding value, right?
Correct.
While in sports management, managing athletes, the vocabulary wasn't there of an agent or a representative adding value. Even among the athletes, I mean, if the athlete's making 1 or 2 lakhs to give away 10 or 15%, like what is your value add? Yeah. It's my effort, it's my brand. So that cross-subsidization happened for a while. But Go Sports actually went through a huge transformation after the CSR mandate came through.
Right.
So the Companies Act was changed. 2013 Companies Act brought in mandatory CSR and put in a schedule 7 of the Companies Act, which actually included support to Olympic and Paralympic athletes and athletes in recognized sports and nationally recognized sports and rural sports as eligible for CSR.
Yeah.
So what that meant was that there were a company of a certain size, both in revenue or profit, was mandatorily required to spend money on CSR. So the spend became mandatory, but application to sport became discretionary. So it was discretionary within a pool that you had to spend. So if you didn't spend it, it would go to Prime Minister's Relief Fund. But still, I mean, sport has had to fight its way. It's still less than 2% of total CSR. But that actually changed the whole trajectory. So we were in the game. We had done this work for 5-6 years as Go Sports. So the track record was there. The clarity was there on what we were doing. But what also happened at that point is Rahul Dravid retired from Test cricket 2012. By 2013, he came to us and said, how can I help you out? He became an ambassador for Go Sports, helped us to clinch our first CSR partnership. And that huge trajectory change happened at that point. Because when you have the credibility of someone that significant and what they've offered to the sport already, and obviously since, the goodwill that brought was the first CSR partner, and the first CSR partner actually changed the trajectory because CSR is a world where very trust-based, very look to a leader and then follow model. So when we got a very credible first CSR partner, that helped in some sense a domino effect.
Okay. Now, there are a bunch of things that can be unpacked here. One sort of statistic that I found unexpected. You're saying sports is still only 2% of CSR.
Less than 2% of total CSR.
Yes. Less than 2%. That sounds crazy, but obviously you have other priorities in CSR, right? You can't even complain. But do you see like a positive shift that the percentage of contribution to sport is increasing, or are we still between 1.5-2%? Has it always been static over the last?
No. So, the percentage of total CSR has remained reasonably static at 1.234%.
Okay.
But what has happened is the overall CSR amounts have increased. Sport has only increased at the same pace. So, between 2015-16 and 22, CSR has grown at 27% and sports CSR has also grown at 27%. So there's been no increase in the percentage that sports sort of enjoys of CSR, but the amount has gone up 27% year on year. So there has been a steady increase in the amount of sports CSR, but not in the sense of what its share is in total CSR.
Okay, so is that a problem, or is there like a benchmark that ideally sports should be 10% of the over, or is that doesn't matter as long as the overall pie is becoming bigger?
So, I mean, in reality, Gopal, they started from zero, right?
Ha,
So,
okay.
1.2, 1.3 is
Okay.
a large amount compared to zero. Like I said, before that, it was entirely discretionary.
Ha.
There was no good reason to give to sport. Here, I think the minute it came into that CSR mandate, like I said, CSR funds mandatorily have to be spent.
Correct.
So it became a discretionary aspect of a mandatory spend. And I mean, when you think of it from a larger context of where we are as a country, we look at health, we look at education, we look at nutrition. I mean, there's so many aspects that have to be dealt with
Correct.
as a priority item, right? So when you look at CSR, 30-40% goes to each of education and health.
Right.
Sport is 1%. Lots of other things, also rural development and others form a decent part of CSR as well. But where I think the shift is starting to happen is when you put the word sport on the table, I think the average person thinks of sport as competition and medal winning. You think of the role of sport as going and winning medals at the Olympics or Paralympics. But across the world, there's actually an emerging movement of using sport for development.
Correct.
So it's called S4D. You see a lot of that in the UK. You see Europe. You see countries like Australia really pick this up as sport as instrument and approach, not just outcome. So if you look at sport and you think of sport as, okay, how many medals does India win at the Olympics or Paralympics? Not that that isn't important. It plays a very important part in ecosystem, the ambassadorship of performance sport and elite sport. But you realize, and lots of research has shown, of all of these other outcomes we talk of in CSR, health, education, sport is actually a very, very valuable delivery agent for all of these. So one, it can do unique things. Two, I think unabashedly, I can tell you that it actually hastens a lot of the results. So sport itself is education. I think anyone who's played sport recognizes how much it gives you in terms of identity, self-worth, but also understanding how the way the world works, understanding how teams work, understanding how people respond to you, to competition, to all of the other stimuli. So it's an education in itself. But what it also gives you is health outcomes, productivity outcomes. It also delivers potentially, and this is the aspect that we've looked at the least, is livelihoods and skill development.
Okay.
There's
in what way?
So, I mean, imagine if we had a country playing more.
Huh.
Playing more, moving more, conscious of how much physical activity we got. There's actually a ripple effect in the population, right? So when people want to move more, they need trainers, they need gyms, they need spaces to play, they need academies. So if movement and sport and physical activity was essential to the way we lived, we would be living very different lives in terms of time spent and money spent. Part of what is the share of the personal budget that goes to sport, physical activity? It's minuscule, if even, right? So imagine a world in which this becomes a priority from school levels, and active living is the end outcome of all sporting outcomes. So in schools, physical literacy comes up as much as numeracy and literacy. It sort of becomes a third prong of education. What's the role of school sport? Today, you ask the average school, it's talent identification and can we produce an Olympian from our school? You talk about community sport. This term is bandied about a lot, right? Grassroots sports. So what is the concept of grassroots sports? When I put it out to most people, they think the role of grassroots sports is talent identification. That it's at the grassroots so that eventually it grows into some tree, right? So the purpose is ultimately everything, all roads lead to Rome, which is how do we win more Olympic medals? But sometimes sport is just to be played for sport.
Yeah.
Community sport is called community sport because it helps build community. It brings people to a common place. It gives outlets to expression. It gives outlets to building new friendships. Dealing with people you otherwise would not have had a chance to interact with. Those elements are completely lost on us. And if we actually integrate them into our daily living, what it builds is a collateral ecosystem of livelihoods, skills, and in some sense, the economies of scale all of that will bring. Build salience and actually markets evolve around them. build competitions, coaching academies come up. Right? So if there is a demand, I think there's no shortage of supply that from either skills, capacity or knowledge perspective that we are able to deliver as a country. But what we are unable to do is build that relevance and salience of living physically active lives, of sport in the community, sport in the day-to-day. And part of it is I feel like we've built this huge image of sport as national identity through the winning World Cups and Olympic medals.
So again, so why is that the case? Is it because normally we always read about in school, in parents or teachers, that we look at sport as just sport, right? That it is just something that if you're not serious in studies, you want to waste time, you want to while away your time, you go play sport, right? And even that stops by the time a child is in, say, 9th standard or 10th standard, because then all those entrance exams and all that comes in. So do you think that culturally the way we look at sport is a very, very narrow, blinkered way? And why is that the case? Because again, now I think you have probably discussed this in other podcasts, seen and unseen as well, is that probably when India started off, right, from the independence era, right, that we were just trying to build the nation, right? We had other priorities. So is that a valid reason? And can that reason still continue today, 75 years after independence, 77 years after independence? Because you look at China, right? China has actually made this, although you can say it's a top-down model, but there's a culture around playing sport as fitness, sport as health, rather than sport as sport, right? So do you think policy intervention is needed, awareness is needed, or how do you tackle this sort of cultural shift that has to happen? Or is it already happening? Are there urban centers like Bangalore where you are seeing this? Or even the education board, there are so many international IB curriculum, American board curriculum, which talk of integration between sports and academics. So are you seeing that shift now, or do we still have long ways to go?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at the statistics, the WHO releases statistics on inadequate physical activity. The numbers for India are stark. I think over 54% of female adults and over 44% of male adults have inadequate physical activity in India. Now, is that seen as a problem? Not everyone sees it as a problem at an individual level. Okay. Is it a public health crisis? Absolutely. But when you look back, I mean, we all know like the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Like, I mean, you deal with the essentials and before you sort of self-actualize and look at the more exciting stuff of culture, expression and all of that. And is sport seen as essential? Right now, it isn't. It's seen as a nice to have or even a luxury for the average person, right? And I mean, some of it also comes from attitudes of who are the successful people professionally in the country. It's people using their minds, right?
Knowledge economy.
The knowledge economy is evangelized. It's where all the action is. People, and in some sense, the body is simply the compartment for this mind that you're trying to keep pristine. And so that also results in attitudes to the concept of physicality, the concept of physical work. I mean, we have our own sort of divisions in terms of who does physical work and who does white collar sort of processing, the computer versus the machine, right? So a lot of those elements also play into our attitudes to physicality, play, and in some sense, for a long time, this dropout from sport at 15, 16, 17 because you have to do exams. Why is that happening? Because it's seen as opportunity cost, right? That sport, the amount of time spent on sport is time spent away from studies.
Right.
But what about the role of sport in keeping you fit, keeping you agile? There's increasing research now on brain health and the role that physical activity and sport play. So maybe we have to sort of switch the game a little bit and talk about the role of sport in getting you better academic outcomes. Maybe that sort of shifts the narrative a little bit.
Has that research been done? Is there research existing right now which you may have happened to come across or commissioned yourself, showing that those who are balanced and versatile, it doesn't have to be sports, it can be music, for example, show a longer success rate with a less chance of burnout, because we're also dealing with the mental health crisis generally, right? So is this are these studies coming out globally or within India?
So on mental health, there's a British I think sports medicine journal piece on the role of physical activity with respect to mental health, and it showed that I think they talked about a 4x times more significant outcomes from physical activity than medication in dealing with mental health issues. There's some research around the distance between green areas and people. The minute you go 15 minutes away from green areas, the level of mental health sort of situations people deal with, mental health crises, increases.
Huh.
So the way cities are established, the amount of access to open spaces, living active lives, there's a strong correlation between physical activity and mental health. There's also some fascinating studies in the US around the role of sport in leadership. So there was a study around women CXOs.
Okay.
And it looked at, I think, over 85 or 90% of women CXOs in the US had played sport at some level, intramural, college or school level. So organized sport, as in some sense, igniting leadership journeys, is actually reasonably well established. Now, whether it sort of directly contributes to academic outcomes, I think there's very early research showing correlation between physical activity rates and brain health. So versatility and sort of the connections happening in the brain. Has anyone associated playing more with better marks in your ICSE, CBSE? I don't know yet. But maybe that's the type of research that we need to do, and in some sense deliver on things that people care about and show that sport actually helps you achieve whatever you want.
Because I think that's what's needed in Indian context. At the end, if parents want to be convinced that sports can help you in academics, that has to happen. On a lighter note, when I was in law school, first year was horrible for me, and then I started playing basketball, and then suddenly I noticed that my mood got better and my performance got better. Right, but even here, just to take you back a bit more, you studied law in National Law University.
National Law School.
National Law School, Bangalore.
Yeah.
You were a Rhodes Scholar, right? The reason I bring up the Rhodes Scholar is because of this integration between sports and academics. I would assume that would have been a sort of pivotal factor in you getting the Rhodes Scholarship, the fact that you have represented Karnataka at the national level in cricket. So at a personal level, right? Even you were trying to balance this, right? I'm talking about in the 90s, right? You were trying to grapple with, should I become a cricketer or what should I do? So can you tell me about your sort of, how did you manage to balance these two things, and what was your family support, right? Because even your parents, I would assume, were they the typical parents who were saying that, okay, you're good in sports, you're playing for Karnataka or whatever, but now it's time to shift towards law or academics?
Yeah, so I mean, great question. So winning the Rhodes Scholarship, unfortunately, I couldn't select myself, but so I don't know what criteria went into that. But certainly, the Rhodes Scholarship was about being multifaceted.
Yeah.
So the fact that I had at least 2 spikes, right? So I'd played very serious cricket and I'd done academically well as well, I'm sure went in my favor. Now, having got there, I can't say I balanced sport and studies at the school level, and I did. I would say well at my academics and particularly well at sports. So I captained the Karnataka under 16 team. When I was 15, 16, I was playing the under 21 level. So I was actually on the path to doing quite well. At which point I sort of went to college, and the structure sort of fell away. I think school sports is much more structured. The minute I had to go to college, that is post 10th standard, 11th and 12th, you were really left to yourself, and you needed a lot of internal motivation. And I felt I lost a little bit there, which is the absence of a clear pathway from being an excellent school sports person to having continued support and structure. So you went from a school program to just going to club, cricket, playing sort of for your college. But I mean, you were at the bottom of the pyramid. I mean, when I was in first PUC, Rahul Dravid was the captain of the college team. So even getting into the 11 was not particularly easy at St. Joseph's Commerce College. So the sort of continued motivation got a little bit lost at that point. But then one of my friends was going to do the National Law School entrance test. I didn't even know that National Law School existed until there was actually a sports fest at my college, St. Joseph's College of Commerce. And the National Law School team came to play volleyball, I think. So there was a intercollegiate fest, and I saw these 5 initials, NLSIU. I had no clue what they meant.
Yeah.
They seemed such an awkward and odd acronym.
Yeah.
And so I went and did a little bit. I said, who are these guys? Who's NLSIU? I mean, I'd heard of RVC. I'd heard of all the engineering colleges. Everyone knew about them. So I went and tried to understand. So again, there's a sports connection there. If not for the sports fest, I've never even heard of NLS.
Crazy, yeah.
But then when I went to second PU and was trying to figure out what my next options were, I could have continued playing cricket, continued and done a BCom. One of my friends was doing the NLS entrance test, and I said, "Hey, what's this test about? What are the?" And I found this exam was quite interesting. So it had logic, it had a little bit of maths, but it had general knowledge. So I'm, like I said, I'm a very curious person. I love trivia, I love riddles, I love logic puzzles. So it seemed like a really fun exam, and that's not the type of exams I'd done till
Okay.
then. So a lot of that was mugging up stuff and reproducing it. So just on a lark, I sort of filled in that application form, went and did the entrance test, zero expectations. And it wasn't like the entrance tests of today where there are thousands and thousands of people. I mean, there were multiple centers. I went to the Bangalore center at the law school, did the test, and then a few weeks later, I get this result and I've come 15th on the entrance test.
Wow.
So at that point, I said, hey, if I've actually got through this entrance test, maybe I have an aptitude for this. But all credit to my parents. So I'd got the admission. I was also in the under 19 Karnataka team. So it came to a little bit of a fork in the road. And that fork in the road was actually thanks to the director of National Law School, Dr. Madhav Menon. So he was the founder director. Rank gets you the admission, but you are still subject to an interview. It's not like the interview has any marks, but it's an intake interview. They're probably looking at you saying, is this person completely crazy? But at that interview, I remember walking in with my parents. So you go in with your parents. There are like 8 or 10 people sitting, very sort of grave faces, and only Dr. Madhav Menon speaks. So he asked me a few questions, and then he ends the interview saying, so young man, have you decided? Are you going to be a cricketer or are you going to be a lawyer? Because I'm telling you today, you're not going to be both. So it was a little bit of a wake up call. And his point was, being a lawyer is also, there's no faffing around there. It's a serious profession. You're either all in. And at that point, National Law School was trying to establish its identity as a professional law option, right? So at that time, this is 1995, law was a profession where if you didn't get admission anywhere else, you went to evening college. Literally no entry barrier, right?
Correct.
So I understand where he was coming from at that point of time. But for a young person, 17, 18 years old, it's a very difficult decision to make. And it wasn't like I was just sort of meandering around on my cricket career. I was very much there, right?
Correct.
On the cusp. So it was a serious decision to be made. All credit to my parents. They just said, your choice, we'll back you, whatever you do. So literally not even a nudge saying, what about sort of thinking about the law, which would be the parents' natural sort of de-risking of their child's life, right? And at this time, 1995, it's not like there's anywhere close to the IPL. It's not like cricketers are making huge amounts of money either. Maybe the top 5 players in the Indian team make a profession out of it. The last 5, even the bowlers are probably struggling with just sort of match fees and making the ends meet. So it became a decision I had to make myself, and I made that decision. And I think the gravity of that decision wasn't lost on me through my law school journey. So I recognized that I'd given up something meaningful and valuable. And in some sense, opportunity cost played in the opposite direction. I just felt like, hey, if you've given up something, and I had given it up, no one had forced me to give it up.
Then you better be a good lawyer.
Better make this count, right? So I spent those 5 years working extremely hard. Again, I would say I brought my sports person attitude to it. So you see an exam or an evaluation as an outcome you want to get to, and how do you work backwards from there? So just sort of studying hard, understanding metrics of how things are judged, putting in the right amount of effort across courses. I did exceptionally well at law school and actually topped the batch that I graduated from. So in that sense, I feel like I justified the tough decision I made. And if you ask me today, zero regrets. Having traversed that other path as a cricketer, there's a very high chance I would have never made it and lived a very frustrated life, still sort of criticizing some selector or some administrator for my state of play. What this has given me is a chance to actually engage with Indian sport in a very deep and meaningful way, using my lawyer's hat, but using much more. But also, in some sense, feeling that gratitude for the freedom and autonomy with which I've sort of lived my professional journey.
Okay, but to sort of try to put you in a spot, I know that's very hard to do with lawyers, but if you had a Rhodes Scholar on one side versus an India test cap on the other, what would you pick?
Oh, I mean, no question. You choose the test cap. In my life, I mean, any sporting achievement of that level is way higher than an academic achievement. I would have chosen the test cap without question. I mean, I still sometimes dream of playing for India, and in those dreams, I am playing for India. I have no dreams of more academic work or exams. So certainly, I think sporting aspirations were always front and center. It wasn't for a lack of belief or ambition, but I think it was a very practical decision at that point of time. You look at a long trajectory, there's no guarantees. I mean, there's no guarantees in the legal profession either. But that feeling that this was very much in your own hands. And I think there's something empowering to know that if you put in the hard work, there is something at the other end without uh, depending on someone else's permission, judgment. I mean, here, of course, in the legal profession, you're dependent on your client's judgment. But I mean, there's a much more diverse set of clients than one bunch of selectors who can either make or break you. Right?
Okay, and now from what I read in a book, you were an all-rounder, and it's not the kind of all-rounder where you can't do anything, so you call yourself an all-rounder. You were actually, you could bat, you could bowl, you could do so. But I believe you had some knee injury also that played into that decision. Was that around the same time?
No, so actually that happened much later.
Okay.
So when I was playing, I was very injury free. So I was a very tall young person. So I was 6 feet tall by the time I was 12 or 13.
Wow. Okay.
So much larger than the other kids. So already that height advantage and size advantage, I think I used to bowl medium pace. I used to bat number 4 or 5. So I think the size advantage was significant. But as I grew, I think my skills also grew. But by the time I was 17, 18, I'd stopped. My injuries came after. So when I went back, got the Rhodes Scholarship, I went back to Oxford and I tried to restart my career. I had a back injury, I had a slip disc, I had... so, I mean, multiple different things happened, injuries. So clearly, I think the world was telling me, hey, you made the right decision. Because a lot of the stuff I went through, if I had those in the course of a professional career, I probably would not have survived those as in terms of being able to continue a career. I mean, they would have been potentially career-ending injuries. So in that sense, the body was also telling me, hey, you made the right decision. So
and I'm sure also in a way, it was also like a experiential sort of blessing, because a lot of what you have done with Go Sports Foundation is about providing that support to athletes. So say for example, if today an athlete is injured, then I'm sure Go Sports Foundation will provide that assistance to help them rehab. But the last sort of question before we move on to the Olympics and also about your book is that lawyers tend to be lawyers. Okay, and from again, please correct me if I'm wrong, but from whatever I remember from the Bar Council rules and all of that, there is this rule that you can't have, two professions. You're either a lawyer or you are something else, right? So this sort of a lawyer who is an entrepreneur, is that how you would define yourself? Do you call yourself, obviously you wear many hats, but how do you define yourself? You're a lawyer, you are a non-profit founder, entrepreneur. How do you wear these hats, and why is it that lawyers generally, historically, you look at it, lawyers end up in politics, right? That's basically the trajectory. You look at Nehru, Gandhi, and Kamala Harris now, whoever, right? Why is it, are lawyers not risk takers in the sense of looking beyond their profession? What are your thoughts about the legal industry sort of transitioning or balancing multiple?
So a bunch of different questions.
Yeah, I know.
So I think the first one is, how do I consider myself? Actually, I avoid any labeling of myself. I mean, if I had to put up some LinkedIn profile, I'd say I'm a lawyer, but a lawyer driven by desire for sport and to make sport better. And I'd say someone wanting to impact and influence the world to make it a better place in some sense. I mean, we are labeled by clients, labeled by others. I'm not going to tell myself I'm only a lawyer. My profession is practicing law. Almost all of my other involvements are actually pro bono. So that's my public service. So I make my keep the lights burning through practicing law, which is very much within the realm of what is permissible.
Yeah.
All the rest are actually different types of involvements where I'm in more advisory capacities, governance capacities. I founded them, but I actually take nothing from them. So in my view, I think we have to find balances of various things we do and find our passions and find what drives us to keep going every day. Sort of doubling down on efforts, doubling down on finding internal drive, internal sort of metrics of what you think is a meaningful life. And I think the legal profession is a very difficult one, right? So the amount of engagement, the amount of time you have to spend getting good enough to even get your work. But then once you get your work, how deeply time engaging that profession can be challenging to do other things. I think the sort of the politics comes naturally because so many of the lawyers are based in Delhi, close to power, often relied on by other politicians. So you realize the ability to influence the world, you can only do so much in court. Why don't you actually look beyond? But I do think being a lawyer and being public spirited go particularly well together. Because I think when you understand systems, most of them are actually related to governance, rules, and structures. And if you're able to look at them from within, you can also look at them from without and see how they can be improved, changed, and structured in different ways. And at the end of the day, I think law is an incredibly powerful tool in ways to engage with the world as it stands and imagine a world that isn't in place, because I think there are very clearly moving parts in a legal system, and if you're able to move them from one place to another, you can almost envision the change that can happen. So I've used law as a very powerful self-motivating tool, but also a very powerful instrument in all of the things I do. So even the way we've structured lots of the Go Sports engagements, so we've worked on sort of just as civil society actors. It's not like I go to a federation and say, can I support your athletes? I'm supporting an athlete as a fellow Indian, and nothing can stop me. So if I wasn't a lawyer, would I have taken that approach? Perhaps not. So just you're always a lawyer and always legally trained, but those acts may not be seen as lawyering, but they are acts of engagement with the public domain, which are still very effective. And I do feel, even in the realm of sport, there is so much more territory that lawyers can occupy in governance, in administration. I think many people sit back and wait for mandates of getting sports law work. I would say 80% of my sports law work has come from me engaging with sport and sport engaging back. It's not sitting back and someone saying, hey, there's a sports lawyer, let me give him some work.
Okay. And also one sort of interesting thing that I've noticed about you, your passion as a player was in cricket, or is still perhaps still in cricket, but you have always had that sensitivity to push Olympic sports. Okay, because obviously I work in a non-cricket sport, so there is always that, I shouldn't say resentment, but there's like cricket guys have it easy, right? Because it's a religion in India. So we see a lot of these the cricket community, not they're staying within their cocoon, right? They're not really thinking about the less privileged of other sports. Is that something you've always been conscious about? That how did you get interested in Olympic sports? Because you're such a cricketer, right?
I mean, good question. I don't have a ready answer. Actually, my first sport was actually hockey.
Okay.
So I played hockey at the school level, then became a cricketer. I mean, I was a cricketer outside my home on the street, but formally I played hockey first. I found it a fabulous sport. I was always fascinated by the Olympics growing up. So I think my first exposure to sport was the Seoul Olympics, Ben Johnson. I was a huge fan of tennis, Stefan Edberg. So that whole generation, when TV first came to India first, and then satellite television came, just sport became my window to the world. And it was not cricket. I mean, cricket was great because I knew the sport. I followed all of the cricketers. I followed the Indian team when they went to Australia. So I have no problem understanding the Australian accent. So in many ways, it was the vocabulary. But I intrinsically at heart, cricket was an opportunity to play sport. But sport for me was all of it. In my garage, I played tennis against the wall. I played I played football. I played hockey. Whatever I could. It was a all-out engagement, I think, of my body and sort of soul with multiple different sports. So I wouldn't call myself cricket-centric, and certainly in my mind, that's not the way I think. Cricket was the sport that gave me that outlet, but I would have been happy playing any of the sports at that level.
Okay, but do you think that because in India cricket is a religion, what do you think of this statement? If you have to unpack this, because the moment you say religion, there are side effects which are not really healthy, because there is a lack of objectivity. You stop thinking, because then it just becomes a completely emotive sort of experience. Because if cricket, look at Australia, like one visual that we all have is when they won the 50 over World Cup last year, when they were going back home, there wasn't a crowd, there was nothing. And we saw in T20 World Cup when we won it, there was the whole Marine Drive, all of it was packed. Do you think that cricket should be viewed as a sport, and the fact that it's viewed as a religion? So is India really a sports country, or is it still a religious country when it follows cricket, or when it's obsessed with cricket like this?
I think it's an interesting question. Cricket has played a very significant role, I think, in our national identity, I would say. You had hockey before independence and to some extent after. But cricket has been that thing that as we grew as a country and our self-worth increased, cricket is the thing that gave us those injections of self-belief again. 1971 when we beat England, it's a significant achievement to beat your colonial masters of the past, right? Then again, 83, the World Cup, 85, then the emergence of Tendulkar at the same time as cable television and private private sports broadcasting. So all of these moments have actually just reinforced cricket as very primary, because it's also at a time when we've not done well at too many other sports. We had some anecdotal stars like Prakash Padukone, Gopi Chand, a few in maybe snooker, and it was very sort of episodic. But cricket is the one that told us, hey, as an Indian, you can just beat anyone else in the world. At a time when I think that we were under very sort of conditions where we actually didn't believe in ourselves as Indians, as a nation. So I think there's a timing issue, but also there's a very structural issue. I mean, we love celebrities, and cricket gives us those celebrities on a platter practically every day, right? So when you look, it's so television centric today. You feel like you know your superstar, you know all of their lives, you know who they're married to, who they're getting divorced from, what their kids are doing. I mean, all of it. So the whole economy around celebrity cricketdom has evolved. While you won't see that around, go to the average person and ask them to name 5 people from the Indian hockey team at the Olympics. I don't think most people would know. Right? So there's an economy that has also evolved around that, which is the broadcast economy and the news economy. But fundamentally, there's another structural element which I think the sport lends itself to a very Indian perspective. Most people would think of cricket as a team sport. But actually, cricket is an individual sport in a team environment. There is, any point of time, it's a play between 2 players with support staff. Right? So it's a bowler versus a batter. Everyone else is in supporting position. So the interesting thing that this ends up creating is that you're actually even in a team environment, you're teammate, but you're also competitor. So you're actually competing with your teammates, and that is what our life is like also in India. It's theoretically a collaborative sport where you're expected to cooperate to win, but you're actually each man for himself in a cricket team.
No, but if you can just explain this to me, how are teammates competing in cricket?
So you actually there's 11 spots.
Competing for a spot in the team.
Competing for a spot in the team. No, I'm saying
once they've made the team.
Yeah, once you made the team, but like the next game, dependent on the previous game's performance, right? So do you, at all points of time, yes, you want your team to succeed, but do you want all your teammates to succeed? Maybe, maybe not. And that's the way we also live our lives in corporate settings. Is our promotion going to be at the expense of somebody else? Possibly. There's only one person who's going to be made the leader the next time around. So there's a sort of unique elements to cricket where it lends itself to individual celebrityhood. I mean, of course, sports like football and basketball also do, but I think this connects with the way we actually occupy our public and private spaces in India. Theoretically, collaborative spaces are actually very much about private consumption of public domains. Also, I mean, another aspect of cricket is, while it's a 11-member sport, it can also be broken down to a one-on-one sport, right? And in a resource-constrained space where you're playing even in a corridor or in a garage, or all you need is a bat and ball and 2 people. So it's not like a volleyball where there have to be a large number of people to make a meaningful game. It is, like I said, fundamentally a one-on-one sport. everyone else is necessary support staff, but not. I mean, you can do without them and still have a meaningful competition, right? Bat versus ball.
Okay, so there are two sort of branches I want to take this to. One is, of course, that cricket is a form of national identity. Uh, is that still the case? Because ironically, now the Olympics is going on. So suddenly our national identity is tied to Olympic medals. While for the remaining 3 years, 11 months, our national identity comes to cricket. So what is this shifting national identity that happens? And why is that happening? Is that strange?
I think it's a little bit of place in the world, right?
Huh.
As Indians, do we occupy sort of the top echelons of the global space, or are we still sort of far away from? And I mean, I think it ties in with the way our country's developed, more people traveling across the world, the growing middle class and aspirations. I don't think any of us see ourselves as less than anyone else, right? And we like to see that reflected in athletic achievement. We love the fact that we have so many CEOs in US tech companies. So people like us, you like to see people like you succeed because it makes you believe a little bit more in yourself. It reaffirms the growing confidence in yourself. So it's about the scale of the platform. It's not that people are interested in shooting or archery suddenly.
Right.
I think we want the Indian to win because what is it about an Indian winning versus a Korean winning? It's closer to home, much more similar to me. If someone like me can win, that means I'm capable of winning. It's just that I've not gone and done all the hard work to get it, become a pistol shooter or a rifle shooter. But if I'd done it, I would have probably also been capable of winning. So that switches, I think, changed in our mind. You see the level of competition in the contingent. I mean, you watch the Olympics. There's something to watch every day from an Indian perspective. 3 or 4 Olympics ago, I mean, you'd be hard pressed to even find an Indian Olympian on air. They'd be playing some sport and some marginal thing that is not even being televised. It was single channel. What you got delivered was probably the world feed. You would watch some France versus Germany playing judo. You wouldn't have, I mean, today you watch the Olympics, there's literally 6 or 7 competitors every single day from India and contending, right? Reaching finals, in some cases winning medals. So there is a active shift. But sometimes I think fan aspiration exceeds the realities of sport. That can have its, like you said, religion has its
side effects.
Is it eminently negative? I mean, you can characterize negative, positive. Is fan expectation an important driver of the sports economy? Absolutely, yes. When fan aspiration goes up, it becomes an emotive issue, but it also becomes a very practical issue. If more Indians want athletes to do well, the economy of that also evolves, right? It becomes there's a demand for it. The political economy finds ways to supply that demand.
Okay. Now, so sticking with identity, because again, now Boundary Lab talks about sport in the context of these other universal themes, right? It could be inclusion, identity. There's one very interesting point that you make about climate change, right? On how sports needs to adapt and be a voice and be vocal about sustainability, right? So, but sticking with sports and identity, again, a very interesting chapter. I think it was a chapter itself about transgender athletes. Should they be allowed to compete? And obviously, we see now in the Olympics what happened with that Italian and Algerian boxers, right? But identity. So you sort of mentioned, and this is generally accepted, that when India won the 1983 World Cup or 1971 when we beat England, I believe that would have been your first Test series win. I think that's your reference. So it was like we are beating our colonial masters. So sports took on the identity was anti-colonial, or we're overcoming colonialism, right? And then you see this sort of shift in the last 30 years post-liberalization, where it is a commercial capitalist sort of model, right? And this is where even a sport like which I care about, basketball, is an American sport. So you have the Americanization from anti-colonialism, or moving beyond, you have the capitalist sort of economy. Even these leagues and all of these are largely European American models, right? The commercial side of it. Do you agree with that sentiment that sport now is taking on a different identity from a sort of anti-colonial, we are sort of transitioning from that to this? And at the same time, do you also see this parallel move, for example, with sports like kabaddi, indigenous sports, where you also have the idea of Bharat and India coming in, right? So how do you see these three realities sort of intermingling, and what do you think is going to succeed? Is it going to be indigenous sports, or are we going to find some sort of, like you said, competitive harmonization between these three
No, it's
identities?
a very interesting question. For me, I think some of the themes that came out when writing the book
Huh.
is the largest shift is actually globalization,
Globalization, yeah.
along with commercialization,
Huh.
and they actually go together, right?
Right.
So the biggest driver has really been television
Hmm.
of the sports economy. And the reality that football match is happening somewhere else in the world, and there are millions of people watching it in another country,
Hmm.
and the players are coming from another continent.
Hmm. Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
I mean, talk about the Premier League, right?
Hmm.
Or the La
Yeah.
Liga. You have Latin American players playing in a league in Europe, watched in Singapore, India, and in Australia,
And
with the
jerseys selling
same
here.
passion,
Yeah.
and jerseys with logos of a Chinese company.
Hmm.
So, I mean, what better advertisement for globalization, right? So, when you realize that you're not limited by the stadium,
Hmm.
that's when sport completely changes its character. And talking about the leagues and what's happened in India, particularly with the IPL, what has it transformed most? Till, I would say, the 90s, early 2000s, it was almost like coming to India was like a punishment tour. Like
The
people would
heat and all of that.
heat, and
Huh.
you'd almost certainly fall sick
Hmm.
and stomach upset. People brought their own food, and suddenly, like in the last 15 years, like Australians desperately want a job in India, desperately want to be in the IPL.
It makes you feel
So
good as a country, right?
yeah, and in
Australians
some
want to come
sense,
to
like
India.
people who rejected you are today
Yeah.
almost begging you, give me a contract, right?
Huh.
And waiting for that IPL auction. So in some sense, the tables turning is a fascinating thing as well, right?
Hmm.
So imagine a country which was seen as like punishment posting now becoming the place to actually go and sort of maximize your commercial potential.
Hmm.
That's an incredible shift in single generation.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very powerful thing. And I mean, the other question around Bharat and having that identity, I think is a deeply important thing, because sport can become a very elitist pursuit as well.
Correct.
And are we connecting with India, that is Bharat?
Hmm.
Sport for everyone. And not everyone has a stadium in which you can have a sort of a shooting lanes or more expensive sports. And the beauty of lots of the indigenous sports are they're very equipment light. They can be played in spaces that are just cleared out and line marked. Maybe Kho with a couple of poles,
Yeah.
but Kabaddi with just literally lines marked. There's a reason those sports are popular, is because the barriers to entry are not large. They use sort of fundamental human movement, and you'll be extremely athletic. You look at wrestling, you look at kabaddi, you
Kabaddi is
look at
phenomenal. Yeah.
kho. I mean, extremely sort of physical sports. And I think connecting with a lot of that and connecting with sport as a participatory community pursuit. And in the sort of I would say the mainstream domain, there's a lot that gets left out. I mean, there's huge competitions in middle of Maharashtra, wrestling competitions.
Yeah.
There's huge, there's akhadas in Haryana. There's even, Northern Karnataka has many, which won't be on the beaten track, but they're whole professions, people making good livings, being wrestlers there. Kho is played very actively in many places.
Correct.
Kabaddi, why is that league taken off? Because it's followed so extensively because people have played it. And often you can forget that element of connecting with the sport because you've also played the sport, and then watching it at the highest level is also attractive. And going back to cricket, all of us have played some level of cricket.
Yeah.
May not be at state level.
Correct.
So the minute you play it, you're connecting with that physicality and the activity of Surya Kumar Yadav catching that catch in the World Cup. Everyone's taken a catch and recognizes how difficult it is. Has everyone shot a gun? The answer is no. Has everyone used a bow and arrow? The answer is no. So that connectedness to audiences is also a large part. And it's a essential part of growing an ecosystem where spectators move from location as spectators to participants, and that's also much easier if they've been participants in some way, shape, or form.
Correct.
So I'm a huge proponent, even during the Olympics, that Olympics should be on television, in schools, in workplaces. Just experience a wide variety of sports. I mean, I watch the Olympics with my kids. They're watching hockey for the first time in their lives. Is there a place to go and play hockey in Bangalore? The answer is not necessarily easy. Can you get a hockey stick for a 5-year-old? I had to search pretty hard. Finally found something. So we're not building those connections of the demonstration effect of watching an Olympics and then converting it into youth action.
Yeah.
And I think finding the connections with indigenous sport, televising it, getting the best in the world to play it, are hugely valuable and important tools in our national development. And at the end of the day, in the same way that cricket, we are actually driving the agenda. We're driving the commercial agenda. We're driving the governance agenda. I will, make a sort of a longer prediction is that ultimately we have to find our own sports ecosystem. The US has this NBA. Does it care about what's happening in other countries in basketball? No.
They call themselves world champions.
I mean, once in a way, they lend their players to the
Yeah.
Olympics. Do we need to get caught up in other people's games? I mean, it's a nice thing to win on other people's turfs, but build our own sort of India that is Bharat for sport. Find our own identity. Find things to play because we want to, not because we have to compete with some other country. I mean, we're such a large and diverse country, and each state, I think, has so much uniqueness. So finding ourselves through sport and finding sport that matters to us without necessarily being entirely driven by some international agenda of what sports are worth playing, trying to become some type of athlete which is not intrinsic. In the way they say, when you're cooking, right, use the ingredients that are close to home.
Native, local, huh?
I mean, that's probably what's healthiest for you. There is an element of find the sort of what's local to sport in your own country, what your environment lends itself to, what your economy lends itself to, what your physical outlook looks at. Are we capable of winning those other games? Absolutely, yes. The talent exists. But do we need to play by other people's rules? The answer is not obvious to me, and I would actually postulate there is a different path we could take.
So exactly. So I'm just saying that's the reason I asked this question, because I think there can be a completely original sports landscape around indigenous sports, and not just sports. And one more interesting thing is they're all rooted, right? They're all on land. They're all on soil. They're connected to the agrarian economy. Even coastal Karnataka, where you're originally from, right? Kambla.
Yes.
Involving buffaloes and all of that, right? Water buffalo. I think this is a fascinating ecosystem, which is why I'm wondering how far are we down this line of Americanization or commercialization or westernization, or are we still, that is still more like a top-down thing, and there's enough scope and more for these indigenous sports to develop, so that the sports identity, sports as health, sports as community, sports as nature, right? Maybe this can also develop quick enough so that it's not overridden by.
No, it's a great point, Gopal, and I would see there's two aspects to all of our relationships with sport. There's us as spectator.
Correct.
And I think that's already been overridden by, I don't know if you want to call it Americanization, but a global agenda of sport. But us as participant doesn't necessarily have to flow as the same from us as spectator.
Right.
And I think we can find our own participative landscapes. And if you want to talk about Americanization, there are other aspects of Americanization, which is do what makes sense to you, don't care what happens elsewhere in the world. And build enough power around that. Build enough salience, build enough relevance. Do we need to wait for some American company to come and sponsor Kabaddi? No. There's enough local brands that connect with the audience that is going to play Kabaddi, watch Kabaddi. Build our own economies.
Correct.
Build the Bharat sports economy.
I think that's the Bharat sports economy, I think, is a fascinating way to look at it. Now, obviously, now the Olympics is going on, and you also mentioned the fact that just because someone is watching the Olympics, it doesn't necessarily translate to people playing. And the example that you mentioned in Boundary Lab, in your last chapter, which I personally found the one where you're taking the most strong stance, right? So for people who are watching this, every chapter in Boundary Lab is framed as a question, right? So, and you have questions around, should MS Dhoni own the helicopter shot? Should transgender athletes play alongside men or should they have a separate category? Right? Should India host the Olympics? Right? That was the sort of final chapter. And also another one interesting thing could be like, should Mary Kom should there be a criminal case registered against Mary Kom because boxing are literally beating someone up, right? So now Olympics that's going, and most of these chapters there's nuance, right? There's Nandan sort of weighs both sides of it, and he in typical fashion he doesn't tell you should think this, which is again missing now in this sort of opinion economy where people are told what to think. So you're left all chapters open ended. The Dhoni one, I think you have taken a stance where at the end, I mean, creativity of the sport should always be there. You can't have players owning shots because then it just becomes mechanical, and how do you even execute that? But coming to Olympics, the example that you gave is that all the Olympics in recent memory, they have all been loss making. And I think Greece is still paying back the debts. I mean, they went into the whole economy crashed sort of coincidentally along that time.
I think it's even Montreal.
Montreal, they're
people are
still paying
tax, local
so,
taxes.
And this again coming to identity, which is what we're talking about now. Our Prime Minister Modi has said 2036 Olympics India would like to host, because then that's like India has arrived. That Viksit Bharat 11 years ahead of time. But you have taken a stance, right? You have said that perhaps it is not the best idea because again based on London, it's not like people started playing sports after the London Olympics. There was just a minor spike during that time, but then it dropped off. Now the Olympics is going on. It is connected to our national identity, that India, a country like India, an ancient civilization, because even Beijing, when it hosted that inauguration where they had those drums and all,
Yeah.
it became such a powerful visual, the bird's nest,
Yeah.
all of that. But you have taken a very firm stance that we can't just mechanically host the 2036 World Olympics. It may actually backfire if you don't really put in some thought into it, and that's the kind of thought that we have not seen in Indian sport. Integrated thinking,
Yes.
and the creative problem solving and all of that, because multiple things you're trying to solve, because cities infrastructure, it has to be built in a way where it's sustainable, usable, and convertible into other purposes. Right? I mean, the cost of hosting multiple sports, and so you're saying that thought, if that is there, then maybe we could host it. But what's your stance on India hosting the Olympics?
Yeah, so it's not, again, like much of the book, it's about trying to get to ask the right questions so that people ask those questions themselves, right? Recognizing sport as public domain, which all of us occupy and have, in some sense, rights to. Hosting the Olympics can be a very emotive issue. We can be almost tempted into it. At the end of the day, when you look at the BRICS countries, the original BRICS countries, we are the only one to have neither hosted the World Cup nor the FIFA World Cup nor the Olympics. So it can be seen as, hey, time to actually sort of peer with all of the rest, at least countries of our equal development. But is the Olympic hosting... there are many good reasons to host the Olympics, but they need a lot of work before and a lot of work after. If we're willing to tread that path, I think hosting the Olympics is a very effective tool of rhetoric. So it actually brings the ecosystem together, gives a sort of almost North Star alignment. But is it worth doing without the pre and post work? I think when you say concrete stance, I have a huge amount of hesitance in believing it's the right move unless you're willing to do all the work that it requires. And all the work that it requires needs you to be in position to actually build. And if you look at the state of our governance, professional capacity, can we host the event? No doubt about it. But can we do it in the way that is going to give us the most effect? I have my sort of reservations on whether 10 or 12 years, we're going to be able to build the effective governance systems that are going to get us there, and a very clear legacy plan after, where we're able to benefit from all of the alleged sort of downstream effects of being an Olympic host. Because we have reached a point where countries and cities are very hesitant to host the Olympics. In some sense, the IOC is going and doing private treaties with hosts. And there's something to be taken from that as well, right? If the great countries of the world, the extremely wealthy countries, the large cities actually are taking a step back and saying, hey, maybe we don't want to host. Even the Commonwealth Games has no host at this point of time. I think Australian City actually gave up the hosting rights. And we have to take signals from that as well, right? There's a good reason why people are hesitant. Is the movement to drive sport to the front end of our daily activities? I think the Olympics has the capacity to do that, make it part of our everyday. But it requires a tremendous amount of work where I don't have that level of confidence that we have the foundation in place to be able to, in 10, 12 years, not only take all of our athletes as a contingent to the place where we would be proud hosts, but also all of the infrastructure is the easiest thing, building stadiums, putting enough money in. But all of the sort of the human capacity elements to build towards so that you can build after, I'm not sure are in place to make this 2036. But are we going to host the Olympics? I think there's an inevitability about it, whether it's 2036, 2040, 2044. I expect that in our lifetimes, we will be hosts to the Olympics. Hopefully, the Olympics takes very different shape where it becomes multi-city. A whole country can benefit from it. More people can access it as spectators, touching and feeling the event. And I do think the Olympics is going to go through its own evolution, and perhaps we'll get it at a time where we are ready and the Olympics is ready for India as well. Because I don't think there is a world of sport without India as an important piece of it. But again, my view is that we should actually take the Olympics on our terms. When we are ready, when we are going to have the most impact from it, and when we believe it's effective in our national development, not in a sort of some other agenda of trying to prove to other people that we belong in some club or are at a certain stage of our development. It needs to work for us, and we need to be ready for it to work for us.
Okay, and do you see a low-cost Olympics ever possible?
Difficult to imagine what that looks like. I mean, more cities now, for example, I think Brisbane is looking at reusing lots of facilities, less construction. But at the end of the day, you're bringing 11,000 athletes, probably equal number of officials or even more. We are going to sort of hit, I think Paris is trying to do a sustainable games with lots of challenges, not even AC in the rooms of the athletes. At the end of the day, we are going to be dealing with much more 10, 12 years from now relating to travel, climate change, which we talked about earlier. I think there is going to be tremendous pressure on sport, and particularly the Olympics and FIFA World Cup and others, to build sustainability into design. So more construction is going to be negative. Travel is going to be something that you'll really have to constrain. I mean, you can't prevent athletes from traveling, but how much else happens? And at the same time, I think technology will help us bridge lots of gaps, much more immersive ways of engaging with broadcasts. A lot of that is going to fill and occupy lots of spaces. I think there's going to be some value to being at the Olympic venue, but there's going to be equal value to experiencing sport through technology and all of the advances we're going to see with that as well.
Okay, so you're saying we can just sit in our rooms and use our VR, AR headsets and have that immersive experience. So that way, at least the carbon footprint of lakhs of spectators coming in from abroad, that will reduce. The athletes will still be there. So it'll be sort of like a bubble Olympics, right? Is that
like Tokyo? I don't know. I mean, it's difficult to, in some sense, look into the future and see what it's like. But can you justify 100,000 people traveling to watch a sports event? That's going to be more and more difficult to look at from a carbon footprint perspective, while you can produce almost equivalent quality experiences through technology. But I mean, obviously there's multiple things to be bridged between now and there.
Correct.
I do think if we can drive towards a more sustainable future for lots of this sport will have a sort of a longer tail and much more social value to add.
Okay.
If it's being seen as sort of a cost on living, sport will have a lot to justify. But I think sport has been very ahead in this as well, of being ahead of the game in terms of using technology to bridge. Like the greatest technology innovations in broadcasting actually come through sport.
Okay.
Most of the sort of the best cameras are used there.
Right from the Berlin, right from there. No?
Spider cam and all of the sort of innovation. Again, I say boundary lab because lots of actually experimentation happens in sport. not only experimentation of the human body of how fast you can run and other things like that, but also technology experimentation, medical experimentation, because you're always pushing the limits, right? So I think sport has that inherent capability to find new ways to deliver even within constraints. And that is ultimately the role of sport, right? Within a constrained environment, within rules, find new ways to get better. And I think the sports industry is a very dynamic and exciting one, and often finds solutions and occupies spaces which otherwise would be very challenging and in some ways could threaten the future of sport itself. So that self-reflection and innovation within the industry is, I believe, something that is going to keep sport moving.
Okay. No, so the reason why I asked about the low-cost Olympics, and as I was listening to you, the analogy came to my mind: India's space program, right? When we sent the orbiter to Mars, right? There was the Western media spoke. They had this really derogatory cartoon in, I think, the New York Times or New Yorker, about this, cows, buffaloes, and all of that. That how could India send it, right? So maybe that could be a legacy where it's low cost does not mean low quality. It's value for money, right? If we can do more with less, that would be a terrific legacy that India perhaps can have by hosting the Olympics. Uh, anyway, so coming back to your book on a lighter note, I mean, these are all very integrated concepts. I loved it. For those of us in the sports industry, we could relate to it. It was very moving and also very affirming, right? That for someone who's maybe in their 20s, 30s, who may be realizing these dilemmas, these questions may be coming up, and there's no avenue to discuss it, because you feel like maybe you're imagining things. A lot of these problems, it may be like, is this even real, or are we just giving excuses, right? So on that note, it was wonderful to sort of read this book. But at the same time, even to host the Olympics, the kind of depth, where I was reading the Olympics chapter on how we should have legacy and this, that, I'm like, are we really going to think of sports at such depth? And the administrators of Indian sport, they should be the ones reading this book. So is that something? Would you give free copies of your book to all of Indian sports administrators?
I'd love to. I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, this was an act of expression, but also an act of communication. I think it was an important book to write primarily for myself. Some could see it as a justification of all of the amount of time I've spent in Indian sport. Is it worth it? And perhaps that's a question I asked myself. And writing the book was an act of justification for myself. I mean, if it's affirming for others, I think that's the communication aspect. And if my experience reflects on more people following similar paths, I think that's a brilliant outcome of it. What I did want to communicate, the communication aspect, was that sport is hugely important to the individual, but also the community. And finding ties that bind us together, it has a very unique space. It is part of the public domain. It may be, players might be private individuals, the bodies that run sport might be private bodies, places where you play might be private stadiums. But all of this occupies our consciousness, our identity, and things that are crucial to the way we want to live and the way we look at ourselves, but also look at others and look at our world. And those public domains need tending, care, attention. And if this can inspire more people to take a step forward and lean into sport, and whether it's gender, whether it's your concept of fairness, whether sort of a design of a tournament, whether there's manipulation in an event, are you just sort of sitting back and saying, looking at that as curiosity and aspect of entertainment? Or do you actually care about that in the way you should care about a public park, right? Replenishing it rather than depleting it. I think the job would be done if some young person is reading this book and saying, hey, this is something worth spending my emotional energy on, but also my time, my intellectual efforts. To the second question of, is it over intellectualizing sport? I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I think it's Indian sport needs lots of action, but it also needs a fair bit of thought. And I just wanted to throw my hat into the ring, whether it's how it's received outside my control.
Okay, so are you already working on Boundary Lab 2?
I wish I was. But I mean, frankly, the amount of work it was, if I knew how much work it was at the beginning, I probably wouldn't have done Boundary Lab 1. But you never know. Maybe there is a sequel at some point.
Okay, awesome, Nandan. Thanks so much for your time, coming down here, sharing your wisdom. And to all those who are watching this, Boundary Lab is available on all sort of shopping sites. We will also link it in the description of this video. So do get your copy and do DM Nandan. He's very responsive on LinkedIn, especially. So please share your thoughts, because I think someone like Nandan, he needs that motivation to write another book. So that will only come through feedback from all of us. So thanks, Nandan.
No,
Thank you so
thank you.
much.
Thanks. Enjoyed the conversation.
Okay,
Thank you so
yeah.
much.